Hello everyone, and welcome once more to our Pro Revenge. Picture this, you've dedicated 2 decades to a company, mastering every system, only to have a new manager exploit your disability to force you out of your job. Now, picture them forgetting to cancel your administrative access to the company's systems before letting you go. How would you react? Let's get straight into the video. The first story is a brilliant one from our petty revenge. So, I was employed at an office that promoted a complete newcomer, an inexperienced, unqualified sycophant, from a junior position to a team lead, who was one of 3 reporting to the manager. The team consisted of about 30 people. HR policy stated that he was ineligible to apply because he had been with the company for less than a year and had absolutely no leadership experience, among other things. Grievances were submitted to HR but were dismissed, even though several fully qualified candidates with impeccable records were also considered. And yes, this individual was known for being a suck-up and wasn't particularly well-liked before his promotion. After he was promoted, however, he became universally despised, except by a few other sycophants. It's quite amusing in hindsight to see how people will debase themselves for the smallest taste of power. Anyway, middle management was aware of how much he was loathed and instructed him to find a method to win people over. His solution was not mandatory, but you should consider them mandatory happy hours each month. For the initial event, almost everyone felt compelled to attend and began trying to work it into their schedules. Some of these individuals had an hour-long commute each way and were arranging for babysitters for their children. These employees were genuinely afraid of losing their jobs if they didn't show up to drink a few beers with their boss. I should point out that he had managed to involve everyone who reported to the manager. I wasn't even technically his subordinate. I was aware of my rights, so I declined the invitation. He stopped by my desk a few times, including on the day of the event, to try to pressure me into going. Dude, there is absolutely no way I'm dedicating my personal time to hanging out with colleagues. You can either pay me to be there, or you can't ask me to attend. I know my rights. I got along with my team members just fine and had attended parties at their homes, but I will not go out with the team lead, no matter what. Naturally, the team lead was not pleased with that and stormed off in a huff. The following day, everyone arrived at work pretending they had a great time, when it was obvious they were just trying to evade the team lead's attempts at being charming. At around 10 a.m., we had our stand-up meeting, where he raved about how wonderful it was to have everyone at the gathering. He then singled me out, remarking on how antisocial I was and how management takes note when individuals are not team players. Don't miss required events, he said. Okay, dude. Well, approximately 20 minutes later, I sent an email to the entire team. Hey everyone, a team member inquired about required, unpaid after-work events, so I thought I'd share this with all of you. State Statute XYZ specifies that for hourly employees such as ourselves, we cannot be compelled to attend these kinds of functions without being compensated for our time. So, if you can't secure a babysitter and are unable to attend, you have nothing to worry about. It was perfectly friendly, entirely non-confrontational, and completely effective. The team lead sat alone at the bar for the next 2, required but not required, happy hours and was forced to find another way to make people like him. And yes, guys, I must admit, a job like that would be an absolute nightmare for me, because there is no way on earth I'd want to socialize with my boss after my workday is over. Have you ever had a job like that? Share your experience in the comments. And while you're there, please remember to like the video, it would be a huge help to me. Also, let me know where you're watching from today. In any case, the next story is a fantastic pro-revenge tale, and it begins like this. So, this all took place many years ago, and I'm altering some details for obvious reasons, as I'm not looking to be sued. For context, I work in IT, not the cool, startup kind. Picture forklifts, warehouses, dusty servers in a back room, and a logistics company that grew more rapidly than anyone could have predicted. When I was first hired, the IT department was essentially just me, an old tower PC in a closet, and a label maker. Also, I happened to use a wheelchair due to a spinal cord injury I sustained before I joined the company. This isn't a tragic backstory for this post, It's only relevant because of how my new boss chose to use it against me. Anyway, when I was brought on board, the company was still family-owned. It was scrappy, chaotic, and everyone chipped in on everything. They gave me a chance when other companies clearly didn't want to bother with ramps, elevators, and other accommodations. The original owner didn't make a big deal of it either. He simply asked, "Can you handle the job?" When I affirmed that I could, that was the end of it. Over the following 2 decades, I built nearly everything that kept the place running from a technological standpoint. The inventory system. I helped create it. The warehouse scanners. I configured the back end. The driver scheduling tool. I patched together 3 separate systems to make it functional. I was familiar with every crude workaround and every temporary fix that somehow became a permanent part of our operations. I knew where all the skeletons were buried. It wasn't a prestigious job, but it was reliable. Most people stayed for years. The warehouse manager had been there even longer than I had. Their head accountant could close the books in her sleep. In operations, there was a guy who knew the road map so well he could glance at a list of addresses and predict which trucks would be delayed. Then, the private equity firm arrived. An exciting new chapter was the catchphrase they constantly used. "That's how you know you're in trouble." Soon after, the original owner retired, selling the business to a large investment group, and all of a sudden we were having meetings about brand synergy and transformation roadmaps. There were glossy presentations about leveraging technology to unlock efficiencies. The corporate suits were everywhere for a period, and then they vanished, leaving behind a slew of new initiatives and one very significant change. A new director of business transformation and IT, my new boss. I'll just call her Karen, because frankly, the name fits perfectly. Karen arrived as if she were producing a corporate reality TV show, always on, as though a camera crew might emerge from a broom closet at any moment. The first time we met, she entered the server room, my small domain that I had fought for years to keep cool and somewhat organized, glanced around for about 5 seconds, and commented, "Wow, this is vintage." I responded with something like, "Yes, most of it is functional. Some of it needs to be replaced," but she interrupted me with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Don't you worry, we're going to pull this place into the modern age. You've been here for a long time, haven't you?" "Yes, for a while." "Perfect. I'm going to need your assistance in mapping all this legacy infrastructure so we can decide what to decommission first." That was the initial warning sign, not what to enhance, but what to shut down. Over the subsequent weeks, I observed her work style, or more accurately, how she discussed working. She had a fondness for buzzwords. Everything was agile, scalable, and cloud-first. She would stand at a whiteboard, sketching boxes and arrows, and behave as if she had just invented logistics. In contrast, if you were to ask her which server processed the inventory transactions, she would fall silent and say something like, "That's a technical matter. We'll standardize that later." She also adopted a specific tone with me. Here are a few examples. Whenever I had to navigate down the main hallway and people had to shift a cart or a box an inch so I could get by, she would remark, "We really ought to redesign this layout. It slows down the workflow." If I was a few minutes late to a meeting because a pallet had been left in front of the only accessible path, she would declare in front of everyone, "We must improve our punctuality, especially in IT. Time is money." On one occasion, she pulled me aside to check in on how I was handling the pace of change, and then followed up with, "Perhaps we can find a role for you that doesn't require so much movement around the building," as if my legs were the cause of our network's bottleneck. Initially, I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. People say foolish things. You correct them once, maybe twice, and hope they learn. I gently explained that I wasn't the one causing delays. It was the layout, the absence of clear pathways, and the fact that no one enforced the rules about keeping hallways clear. I even provided her with a written list of straightforward changes that would make the building more accessible and efficient for all employees. That list was ignored, but her comments persisted. At the same time, she began to tear down the very culture that had kept the company running smoothly. The senior warehouse manager was informed that his informal procedures were no longer acceptable and that he needed to get approval for everything from a new operations coordinator, a recent graduate who had never set foot in a warehouse. The accountant was told she would now have to justify any expense over a minor amount to a finance person at the parent company who had never been to our office. The operations team was required to start using a new dashboard that Karen favored because it looked impressive in presentations, despite it not displaying half of the vital information the old reports provided. Then, she shifted her focus more directly to IT. We had a meeting where she unveiled her grand strategy. "We're going to migrate everything to the cloud," she announced, pacing at the front of the conference room like a budget TED Talk speaker. "No more cumbersome on-premise servers. We'll outsource basic support to a partner who can provide it more cheaply and at scale. Internally, we will retain only strategic positions. We require agility. We require speed." I interjected, "Have you examined the connectivity on the warehouse side? The scanners lose connection even on good days. If the primary system isn't local, we will experience outages every time the internet has a hiccup." She smiled the way one might at a child who doesn't understand how a microwave operates. "That's a negative way of thinking," she said. "Modern systems are resilient. We just need to find the right partner." The translation was clear. She had already made this promise to the parent company, and any concerns I raised were simply seen as negativity. A few days later, she sent me a performance expectation document. It looked like a template with my name inserted. I was expected to demonstrate agility, improve work pace, and align with transformation goals, along with all the other typical vague corporate jargon. There were no specific metrics and no timeline, just a thinly veiled threat disguised in corporate speak. I knew exactly what it was, a paper trail. Around this time, she began to scrutinize everything I did. A server patch that required additional testing? Why is this taking so much time? I would explain that if we rushed it and something went wrong, the entire warehouse would come to a standstill. She would respond, "You're using that as an excuse. Our partner claims they can perform this type of patching overnight." Their partner, she constantly mentioned, was a managed service company she intended to hire, and I had researched them. They were inexpensive, and their reviews were far from stellar. Meanwhile, her comments about my wheelchair became progressively less subtle. She would joke about traffic jams when I was in a hallway or say things like, "If our team were more mobile, we could have more walking stand-up meetings around the building." On one occasion, she actually said, "We need faster movement and faster thinking." It was clear what she was implying. She never explicitly said, "You're disabled, so you're slow," but she didn't need to. Everyone within earshot understood her message. I began to document everything: emails, notes from conversations, dates, times, and who else was present. I forwarded the emails to my personal account. I wasn't yet certain what I would need it for, but I knew better than to rely on a corporate HR department under private equity ownership. However, the final straw came in the form of a calendar invitation, check-in on performance. The subject line was just that, and it was only me and her in a small conference room. She had a printed form in front of her and that "I've already made my decision" expression on her face. She began with feigned concern. "I've observed some resistance to change," she stated. "You seem quite attached to the old way of doing things." I replied that I wasn't attached to anything for sentimental reasons. I was simply attached to systems that were effective. I didn't care if a server was in the cloud or under my desk, as long as the trucks were dispatched on time and the warehouse staff received accurate pick lists. She then said, "That's precisely what I mean. You're not embracing the new direction, and frankly, your pace is not up to the required standard. The leadership team demands agility." I pointed out that my support tickets were current, system uptime was excellent, and the only significant issues we'd had recently were due to the poorly conceived tools she had imposed on the operations team. She turned to her form and jotted down a note. "So, you're unwilling to accept this feedback, correct?" I could see the direction this was headed. I didn't lose my temper, though. I simply asked one question: what would success look like to you, specifically? What measurable changes do you want me to make? She didn't have a concrete answer. She just recited phrases from the form: faster, more flexible, less resistance. I went home that evening and told my wife, "I think she's trying to force me out." My wife asked, "On what basis? You've never even had a written warning." I replied, "They don't need a real basis. They just need to create enough of a paper trail that HR won't push back." I considered approaching HR first with the comments about my disability and the ambiguous performance issues. But HR now reported directly to the parent company, and the head of HR had been very close with Karen recently. So, I had no faith that they would support me. Therefore, I did what I do best: I observed, I documented, and I made preparations. Fast forward to Thanksgiving. Our company always distributes a generic "thank you for your hard work" email around the holidays. The previous owner used to write something personal. The new ownership sent a message that was clearly crafted by a marketing department. Regardless, it was still a day off, and I was at a relative's home, sitting in a crowded living room that smelled of food, half attentively watching a game I had no interest in. But then my phone buzzed. I looked down, expecting a message from a family group chat, but it was a text from Karen. There was no "hey, can we talk next week," or any kind of warning, just a cold block of text. Effective immediately, your position has been eliminated as part of our transformation efforts. Your final paycheck and a severance payment of $500 will be processed next week. Please return your badge, laptop, and any company property by Monday. We appreciate your contributions and wish you all the best in your future endeavors. I read it twice, handed the phone to my wife without a word, and she read it, looked at me, and simply said, "You have to be joking." $500 for 2 decades, and fired by text message on Thanksgiving. A few minutes later, an email from HR appeared in my inbox. It contained the same wording, just in a more formal tone. Attached was a standard severance agreement. No extra weeks of pay, no explanation, just "position eliminated." I stepped outside for some fresh air because I felt as though I had been punched. The initial wave was shock, followed by embarrassment, and then a searing, white-hot anger that I hadn't experienced in a long time. You tell yourself that these companies care, that loyalty is valued. Logically, I knew better, but a part of you still believes they will at least treat you with basic human decency. Right? Instead, I received $500 and a boilerplate paragraph. I opened the email again and noticed something: their "effective immediately" clause. I was familiar with our off-boarding procedure because I had created the damn checklist myself, and there was an entire section dedicated to disabling accounts, revoking access, and removing administrative permissions. This was supposed to be initiated by HR submitting a ticket to IT. IT, as in me. And guess who hadn't been included in the loop yet? Out of habit, I opened the VPN application on my phone and logged into the company servers. I was connected. No issues. I tried the remote management tool. I was still in. I sent a test command to one of the inventory servers, and it executed just as it always had. They had terminated their primary systems administrator via text message on a holiday and, in all their infinite wisdom, hadn't thought to cut off his access first. I sat there, staring at the screen, thinking about all the leadership speeches I'd endured over the years and all the talk of "we are a family." I thought of all the times I had stayed late to keep something running because drivers needed their routes and staff needed their paychecks. But then I recalled Karen asking in a meeting if my wheelchair was slowing down the office workflow. I remembered her telling me my pace wasn't good enough, the comment about a more mobile team, the performance plan with no tangible metrics, and the timing of this little text message stunt. And yes, I thought about that $500. It wasn't the amount itself, though. I mean, I'm not naive. I know companies don't typically offer golden parachutes to regular employees. But it was the message it sent: you are worth less than a new laptop. It took me a couple of days to calm down enough to think rationally. I didn't interfere with the systems that first night. I just sat with my anger and discussed everything with my wife. She said, "If you choose to sue, we have those emails." The things she said about you slowing things down because of your chair, that's not acceptable. I replied, yes, I'm going to speak with a lawyer, but I also have other options I'm not proud of. She understood what I meant. She knows my profession. Her only condition was straightforward: whatever you do, don't land yourself in jail. They are not worth that. So, I mulled it over for a couple of nights. In the end, what drove me to act was not just what had been done to me, but what she had been doing to everyone else. Over the next week, I contacted a few people from work: the warehouse manager, the accountant, someone from operations, and one of the other IT guys. I wasn't asking them to do anything illegal, I was just checking in, informing them that I had been eliminated, and listening to their stories. Each person had a tale to tell. The warehouse manager had been informed that his role might not exist in the new structure and that he should begin documenting his processes for a transition. The accountant had been told her job was at risk because the parent company wanted to centralize the finance department. The operations team had a new middle manager who overruled every decision and then blamed them when things went wrong. One of the IT guys said, "She asked me how long it would take to bring some offshore guys up to speed on our systems. She thinks I can distill 10 years of experience into 3 Zoom calls." The common theme was evident: anyone with actual knowledge of how things operated was being treated as disposable. I didn't reveal my intentions to them right away, though. I just said something along the lines of, "If you're considering other options, you wouldn't be the only one," and left it at that. Meanwhile, I explored the systems. I need to be very clear here: what I did was not legal. I'm not attempting to justify it or encourage anyone to replicate it. I'm simply recounting what occurred. I also didn't just sit there and type, "delete everything." That's not how real systems operate, and it would have been too conspicuous anyway. Instead, I relied on what had made me valuable in the first place: I knew their vulnerabilities. For instance, we had a backup system that had been struggling for years. It functioned, but only because I meticulously managed it, adjusting schedules when the load was too high and regularly testing restores, even when no one asked me to. I knew which backups were mission critical, which were merely nice to have, and which were primarily for satisfying auditors. The new partner Karen wanted to bring in had already requested documentation on our backup status. I had prepared a fairly detailed overview for them, but I had kept it general because I didn't fully trust them. With my still active admin access, I made some adjustments. I won't delve into the deep technical details because, again, I'm not here to provide a tutorial. But the essence of it is that I modified some scripts so they would report successful completion without actually backing up certain key databases correctly. I set a few retention periods in a way that appeared reasonable on the dashboard but would quietly expire the most recent good snapshots more quickly than usual. I also tidied up some old documentation within the internal knowledge base, nothing overtly malicious, just minor edits that would lead someone down the wrong path if they were trying to resolve a major outage under pressure on their own. These changes wouldn't cause much harm on their own. As long as someone who was familiar with the environment was present, they would notice the anomalies and correct them. So, that was part 1. But part 2 involved people. I contacted these long-term colleagues again and had more candid conversations. No technical jargon, no mention of systems, just the reality of the situation. "Look," I said to the warehouse manager over the phone, "they fired me by text on Thanksgiving, gave me $500, and told me to drop off my badge like it was a pizza box. Do you honestly believe they'll treat you any better once they've gotten what they want from you?" He was silent for a long time before he said, "I've received an offer from a competitor. I was going to wait and see, but yeah, to hell with this." The accountant had also been discreetly looking for another job. She was afraid to leave because she had never worked anywhere else in her adult life. But she had also been told that her position might be relocated to another city, and she had family she couldn't move away from. We talked it through. I told her what had happened to me and that I would serve as a reference for her wherever she applied. I told her that if they were already making her train a central finance resource, it was a bad omen. She called me a week later to say she had accepted a position at a smaller company across town, better hours, slightly lower pay initially, but greater stability. One of the operations guys had been complaining to me for months about the new dashboards and unrealistic targets. I told him, if you're serious about leaving, now is the time. They are about to do something incredibly foolish with the systems. Being associated with that ship when it sinks is not going to do your resume any favors. So, yes, over the next month or so, 5 people handed in their resignations or accepted offers elsewhere: the warehouse manager, the head accountant, the operations lead, and 2 experienced IT staffers who were familiar with parts of the environment that even I didn't completely manage. Some of them provided the standard 2 weeks notice, while others used up their remaining vacation time, making their actual working days even fewer. None of them were replaced before they left. Karen's grand transformation timeline was non-negotiable because she had already promised results to the parent company. She continued to push forward with her cloud migration partner. The plan, as she had boasted about in a meeting before I was fired, was to move our core systems off the local servers and into a sophisticated hosted environment in a single, all-at-once cutover. If you've ever worked in IT, you're likely cringing just reading that. Under normal circumstances, if I were still there, I would have been the one to throw myself in front of that train. I would have insisted on parallel runs, fallback plans, and incremental migrations. I would have exhaustively tested backup restores before we touched anything. I would have fought to keep certain functions on site until we were certain the connections were absolutely solid. But now, I watched from my couch. My access remained active for a surprisingly long time. They must have assumed HR had taken care of it. HR assumed someone in IT had, and the remaining IT staff was too overwhelmed with migration preparations to double-check. Eventually, my VPN access was cut off, but by then, I had already done what I needed to do. But then the real fun began. The cutover was scheduled for just before one of their busiest seasons. The rationale was that they would see efficiency gains right as order volumes increased, which would look great on a report. Also, the parent company wanted to see certain numbers by a specific quarter. From what my former colleagues told me afterward, it was utter chaos. They performed the switch, and initially, things seemed fine. The new dashboard was active, and users could log in. Everyone congratulated themselves. But then, the system started to fray at the edges. Warehouse scanners began to randomly drop their connections. Orders would appear twice in one system and not at all in another. Inventory counts would change unexpectedly because an old, forgotten process hadn't been fully disabled and was still accessing the database. Because the migration partner didn't fully comprehend our convoluted mess of temporary scripts and strange integrations, they overlooked a number of things that used to run behind the scenes. Those processes hadn't been included in their neat diagrams. Drivers arrived for their shifts to find that their routes hadn't been printed. The scheduling tool depended on a job that was never configured in the new environment. People scrambled. They called the partner, who looked at their clean servers and said, "Everything is fine on our end. It must be your network." The staff on the ground called the remaining IT guys, but they were completely swamped. And then someone suggested, "Okay, let's roll back. Restore from last week's backup." Well, you can probably guess where this is going. Those backups, the ones that had been quietly misconfigured to appear successful, the ones with the adjusted retention periods, they were in for a nasty surprise. A few restores worked, but they were so old that using them would have meant losing weeks of transactions. Every minute they spent trying to sort out that mess, trucks sat idle, warehouse workers stood around awaiting instructions, and customer orders weren't being shipped. Major clients do not like to hear "our system is down" during their peak seasons. Some shipments did go out, but with incorrect contents or quantities. Returns began to pile up, and angry emails flooded in. One large retail client apparently called and said, "If you don't get your act together, we are suspending all future orders." On top of that, payroll was affected. The accountant had left, and the person she had trained hadn't been granted full access yet because the parent company wanted tighter control. Combine that with broken systems and people being unable to clock in correctly, and suddenly paychecks were delayed and incorrect. Nothing will destroy morale faster than people not being paid accurately. From the outside, I observed some of this unfolding on social media and review sites. Drivers and warehouse staff were posting vague complaints about idiot management and systems that don't work. One of the warehouse guys texted me, "Man, you chose the perfect time to leave." Internally, from what I was told later, the situation was even more dire. The parent company flew in a couple of their own IT personnel and some executive types for all-day emergency meetings. Karen was apparently in full damage control mode. She tried to blame their technical debt left by the old team. She tried to blame the managed service partner, and she even attempted to cast suspicion on me. At one point, according to a friend who was in the room, she said something like, "We cannot rule out the possibility of sabotage from disgruntled former staff." The previous administrator was terminated recently. One of the executives asked, "Do we have any evidence to support that?" They didn't. Of course, because there was nothing concrete they could point to. The logs mostly showed processes starting and stopping as normal. The configuration changes I had made looked like someone had been tweaking schedules and settings over time. You couldn't link it to a single, dramatic event. The more plausible explanation, and the one that made it into their internal reports, was that they had conducted an aggressive migration without a proper understanding of the systems, without enough overlap, and without adequate testing. In other words, it was a case of poor planning and worse management. And who had been in charge of that plan? Of course, it was Karen. The managed service partner protected themselves. They pointed to emails where they had requested more time, more documentation, and more testing cycles, only to be told to proceed. The remaining IT staff also covered themselves. They had ticket histories showing they had raised concerns about the timing and risks, only to be dismissed. The warehouse and operations teams had emails where they had requested to delay the switch until after the busy period and had been denied. Every thread you pulled led back to the same person. While all of this was happening, I had my own plan in motion as well. As soon as I had calmed down after being fired, I consulted with a lawyer about the disability discrimination angle. I showed them the emails I had saved, the ones where she said I slowed down the office, where she suggested I might be better suited for a less mobile role, and where she linked my pace to my future with the company. I told them about the performance plan with no real objectives. I told him about being fired via text, the $500 severance, and the fact that I was the only visibly disabled person in the department. The lawyer was very clear: discrimination cases are not guaranteed wins. But they also said that companies really dislike it when you have clear, written comments connecting a disability to performance, followed by a sudden termination. They drafted a letter to the company's legal department. It was polite but firm. It detailed the timeline, the comments about my wheelchair, the lack of a meaningful severance package, and the humiliating way they had handled it. It didn't make outrageous demands, but it made it clear that we were prepared to file a formal complaint if they didn't resolve the matter. I sent that off right around the time their systems were imploding. I didn't plan the timing that way deliberately. I didn't know exactly when their cutover would crash and burn. But I can't pretend I wasn't pleased when my lawyer called and said, they responded very quickly, which usually indicates they are worried about something. According to my lawyer, their response was revealing. They didn't admit to any wrongdoing, of course they didn't, but they were suddenly very willing to resolve the issue amicably. They offered a much larger settlement than $500. We're talking enough to cover several months of living expenses and then some. They also offered to officially record my termination as a position eliminated due to restructuring, with a neutral reference. In exchange, I had to agree to keep the terms of the settlement confidential and not file any formal charges. My lawyer presented the options: fight it out for potentially more, or accept the decent offer and move on. I thought about it. A part of me wanted to drag them through the mud publicly. I wanted my day in court where I could talk about her comments, the text on Thanksgiving, and everything else. But then I considered the stress, the time, and the fact that they were already being raked over the coals internally anyway. The systems disaster was costing them far more than anything they were going to pay me. So, I took the deal. I'm not foolish. Revenge feels good, but you can't pay your bills with it. I signed, they paid, and I moved on. Back at the company, things continued to slide downhill. They managed to get through the busy season, but they lost a major client who had had enough of the missing and incorrect shipments. Word got around in the industry, don't rely on them right now, their systems are a disaster. More employees quit. The managed service partner increased their rates because suddenly everything was classified as out-of-scope emergency work. The parent company eventually did what parent companies always do when a strategy fails, they looked for a scapegoat. Karen was asked to resign. I heard about it through the grapevine a couple of months after my settlement. It wasn't a major public firing or a dramatic walk of shame, just your typical executive departure, a bland announcement about pursuing other opportunities, and then her badge stopped working. Still, I can't deny it, when a former co-worker texted me, "Guess who's gone?" I grinned like an idiot. From what I was told later, the company never truly recovered. They closed one of the regional warehouses, sold off a few assets, and were eventually acquired by another logistics company. The old name and logo vanished from the trucks and warehouses. The buildings I had spent 20 years keeping operational now bear someone else's logo. As for me, I took some time off, and between my savings, my wife's income, and the settlement, we were fine. I updated my resume and began applying for jobs. I was honest about what had happened, minus the part about me helping to light the fuse. I framed it as the company was bought out, new management pushed out the old staff, and I was part of a restructuring. It took a little while, but I found a position at a smaller company that actually seemed to mean it when they said they cared about their people. Remote work was standard there, which meant there were no hallways for anyone to complain about. And the person who interviewed me actually asked about my experience instead of my wheelchair. I established some firm boundaries for myself at the new job. I documented everything in a way that other people could understand. I refused to be the sole person who knew how critical processes worked. I made sure there were clear offboarding procedures that didn't rely on just one individual. I never wanted to be in a position again where I was the glue holding everything together, while leadership saw me as just another box on an organizational chart. And the next one is an awesome petty revenge story titled, "I Hope You Like Stickers." So, my first car was a Chevy Aveo, a little runabout that I could fill up for maybe $20, and I drove that thing into the ground because I had bought it brand new and fully paid it off. By the end of its life, it was missing door handles, the gas cap cover, you name it. A few days before I was set to sell it to one of those cash for cars places, I got into a minor altercation with a woman in a parking lot because she parked so close to my passenger side door that she dented it when she got out, leaving her red paint on my side mirror. She also cracked it. She was a very large woman, so I know she was leaning heavily into her door as she exited, which caused the damage. I was literally sitting in the car as it happened. At first, I was polite and said something like, "You just dented my car with your door. We need to exchange insurance information, please." But she just kept walking away as if she had done nothing, completely ignoring me as I called out to her as she waddled away. And I know she was ignoring me because she kept glancing back at me and waving me off. Well, that wasn't going to work for me. So, I followed her into the store, prepared for a confrontation. But instead, I came across one of those sticker machines that cost about 50 cents, filled with the most hideous stickers you can imagine. I bought a whole bunch and went to town, plastering them all over her car, the windshield and especially her driver's side door. I moved my car over about 3 rows and parked between some other vehicles because I wanted to see her reaction when she saw the stickers. I probably waited for about half an hour, but it was completely worth it. She was swearing and throwing the biggest tantrum of her life as she walked around her car, discovering sticker after sticker. I don't care if my car looked a bit rough, that's not an invitation to damage it further, and refused to take responsibility for it. And yes, guys, if you can't get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist on the left, which contains thousands of videos. Otherwise, I will see you again.